So the last part of this lecture is about interpreting human pedigrees. Human pedigrees are really genetic family trees. They're constructed, the data is gathered and put together into a pedigree, usually as the first step in what we call a gene hunt. So if I was trying to find the gene responsible for a certain disorder, first thing would be to find some families that had a clear heritable or clear inherited several clear inherited cases of the disorder, and then I would gather information from them to put together the pedigree. And often we're trying to determine just the most basic information about that disorder, such as what is the mode of transmission of the allele causing the disease. Now, when I say mode of transmission, that has two parts. The first part is a mode of transmission is, number one, is the allele acting in a dominant or a recessive manner? Number two, is the allele traveling on an autosome, or is it on the X chromosome? Is it sex-linked? So those two questions are part of what we call the mode of transmission. Now, human pedigrees use standard symbols, although there is some variation in how the symbols are done. But if you know enough about pedigrees, then no matter what research you're looking at, you will be able to adapt to the small differences in symbols that sometimes appear. An unaffected male is always a square that's not shaded in. An unaffected female is always a circle that's not shaded. A person with the trait or disease is a shaded square or shaded circle. And then here, if you don't know the sex of the individual, you can use this diamond shape, although that's very rare that you would see that. A carrier, it can be indicated, a carrier is an individual that's heterozygous but doesn't show the trait, so heterozygous but looks normal would be shown with a dot in the middle, or like a half, sometimes it's a half-filled shape. Here they just show a line through the middle, but sometimes it's filled in on the half side. So these symbols I won't use because I'm only going to show you whether someone's affected or not affected. But on some pedigrees you might see this additional information. You might have multiple persons of the same phenotype, like if you had 5 males and they were all normal, you might see a square that's not shaded that has a 5 in it. And that's just usually because there's not enough space on the page to put all of them. But if a person is deceased, there's a line through. Or I've also seen where there's a plus mark sometimes on somebody who's deceased. The proband is usually a P with an arrow. It just indicates which person in the whole family pedigree was the first person that came maybe to the doctor's office, or first asked for some research to be done, or first came to the attention of the doctor. It doesn't change the information. It's just the person of interest. If a person's family history is unknown, I guess a question mark's pretty self-explanatory. This is a small, tiny little pedigree, so you'll have several generations. This one just has 2 generations. Roman numeral 1 is this generation. You have a male and a female. Connected by a line is a mating. Doesn't have to be a marriage, but a mating that produced 3 children. So the line coming down and then splitting off, these are their children. So this would be generation 2, shown here. All right, and so that's the smallest possible pedigree you could really have. Usually you'll have multi-generational pedigrees. An adoption actually isn't biologically important because an adopted person is actually, even though they're in this family, they're actually biologically not. They're over here with their biological parents. So you might see that. I won't put that in my examples. But if you're looking at some actual pedigrees in a research paper, you might see that. And then twins can be identified a couple ways. Some kind of split symbol, but honestly I've seen twins done a lot of different ways, and so usually in the figure legend it'll explain what some of the specialized symbols might mean. So that's just some of the basics of pedigrees. Alright, so what I'm going to ask you to do with a pedigree is to make an educated guess about what's the mode of transmission of the allele causing a certain trait. And then after you've made that educated guess, then we'll start to figure out the genotype, most likely genotype of certain individuals in the family. This example, I'm going to tell you up front, is an autosomal dominant trait, meaning the allele causing Waardenburg syndrome behaves as an autosomal dominant. Autosomal means it's on the autosome, one of the autosomes, not the X chromosome. And dominant means you only have one allele of this disease allele to show the phenotype. The phenotype is, you can see the boy in the upper right hand corner. He has what's called the white forelock, which is that bit of hair at the front, and also deafness, not being able to hear. So that's part of the syndrome. There's some other symptoms, but those are the main ones. But what you're seeing here is a typical dominant pedigree, autosomal dominant. And here at the bottom you see the proband right here. So you can see that we've identified the generations as Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3, Roman numeral 4. And so each individual from left to right in the generation is given an Arabic number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so this individual here who is deceased would be given the number Roman numeral 1-1. That would indicate this person. Roman numeral 1-2 would indicate this person here. And so on. This is Roman numeral 2-1, Roman numeral 2-2, and so on. So you number everybody in that generation so you can refer to them unambiguously. Now, the hallmark of an autosomal dominant. First of all, dominant has a certain pattern. The easiest way, and I'm not teaching you how to be a genetic counselor, I'm just teaching you the fundamentals. If you go on to an upper level genetics class, they'll add on to these basic concepts. There's a few little minor exceptions and tweaks and things that would be added. But the basic rule would be, if you have a dominant trait, then if you check everybody who has the dominant trait, if you check, they should have, or they will have, a parent who also has the trait. So these individuals here, Roman numeral 4-1 and Roman numeral 4-2, each have a parent, Roman numeral 3-2, that has the trait. Then you check, and over here, numbers Roman numeral 4-7 and 4-8, they have a parent here, Roman numeral 3-8, that has it. So you check that bottom generation, and everybody in the bottom generation who has it, all the shaded ones, have a parent who also has it. Then you go to the next generation up. You have several people who have it. Do they all have a parent who has it? Yes. And then you go up. Do these two have a parent who has it? Yes. And you check all the way up. That's the pattern for the dominant, is that everyone who's affected has an affected parent. Now, the way you know it's autosomal, or the way you feel 99% sure anyway, is that if you look at the individuals who are affected, just the shaded ones, if they're all male, that's going to lead you to think it's sex-linked. But if you have some males and some females, then you want to go ahead and assume it's autosomal. Most genes are not on the X chromosome. The X chromosome is only one chromosome out of 23 different types in human. So the chance that a gene is on the X chromosome is less than the chance that it's on the other chromosomes. So unless you see all males that are affected or shaded, you want to go ahead and assume that it's autosomal. So on this slide, I summarize what to look for when you're trying to determine mode of transmission, specifically the dominant versus recessive. If you're looking at a pedigree and you notice that every affected child has at least one parent who is also affected, that's a dominant pattern, and you would have to check everyone in the whole pedigree. Okay. Now, for the recessive, you're looking for something different. You're looking for any one mating between two unaffected parents that produces an affected child. So this, on the recessive pattern, you only have to find one mating that fits that pattern. Okay. Oh, and let me mention something. It states here, not every mating is informative for the recessive. Some matings are ambiguous. So you only have to find one mating that clearly shows the pattern for the recessive. So on this pedigree, this actually shows a recessive pattern. Let's say you look at this and you say, okay, maybe it's a dominant. So let's check for dominance. We have individual 4-2 here. Do they have at least one affected parent? No. So already we've violated the rule of dominance. So we ask the alternative question. Is there a mating between two unaffected parents that have at least one affected child? Yes. So that's the recessive pattern here. You have another recessive pattern up at the top with individuals 1-1 and 1-2, both unaffected, and they have an affected child, individual 2-3. So you actually see 2 points where you see a pattern of recessive transmission. Now, is this allele sex-linked or autosomal? Well, remember what I said. If this is not very much data here. You only have 2 affected individuals, but you have 1 male and 1 female. So you don't really have an overwhelming amount of evidence to convince you that it is sex-linked. Therefore, go ahead and assume it's autosomal unless you have enough evidence to say sex-linked. So this would be an autosomal recessive mode of transmission. All right, so what about this one? And what do you think about this one? All right, now we have family 1 and family 2, and actually they both have the same mode of transmission. What is it? And what about these examples, A and B? On this one, A is different than B, actually. So what is A? What's the mode of transmission? What's the mode of transmission for B? How about this one? Now the double line indicates inbreeding. So you can see that individual 3-2 and 3-3 are actually cousins, okay, because their fathers are brothers. These are brothers, and actually their mothers are sisters, so they're actually double cousins. That's interesting. So, but anyway, so this is inbreeding between double cousins. So pretty interesting pedigree. But what would you guess the mode of transmission would be here? So I'm going to post some practice pedigree questions on Learning Module 1. I will put them near to the Chapter 3 lecture materials. So make sure you also go on there and double check that you're looking at things correctly. We will be looking at these types of pedigrees in lab a little this week.